Okay, so today is the 24th of May, 2017. I'm Benjamin Connor, and this is David Holzapfel. I'll be
Pleased to meet you, Ben.
Pleased to meet you too, for the first time ever. Today we have on audio recording Sean Von Rantz on still camera.
Who?
Sean Von Rantz.
Son.
Von Rantz's.
Von Rant's son.
Von Rant's son, that's hard to say.
Yeah.
On still camera we have Roxanne Burt, and on video camera we have Ben Kowalski. Okay, are you ready? You ready? You ready?
Yep.
Okay. I'm just gonna ask you some questions about your background. Where did you move? When did you move to Marlboro?
I moved to Marlboro in 1970.
Where did you live before that?
Just before that, I lived in Ohio.
Right. What are some of the reasons why you moved here?
Well, in Ohio, I was going to college in Ohio. My parents lived in London, but when it was time, well, I quit school in Ohio and moved to Vermont, but first to Bennington. That was in 1969, the end of 1969. And then in 1970, started to attend Marlboro College in the fall of 1970.
How many years have you lived in this town?
Since 1970, so that's 46 or so years.
Alright. What's your spouse's name?
My spouse's name is Michelle.
What are the names of your children?
Our older son is Simon, and our younger son is Forrest.
During what years did you attend the Marlboro Elementary School?
I never really attended. I worked there.
Yes.
And I began working there in, it's probably like 1976 or 1977. And I started my working life at the Marlboro School as a bus driver.
Alright. Where did the kids go to college?
Was your question about
Yeah.
my kids going to?
Marlboro School, yeah.
Yes, they did go to Marlboro School. And that would be, probably from around 1980. And then by the end of the 80s, they were in high school. So they're only 2 years apart. So our older son Simon would have started, probably in 1978 or 9, somewhere around there.
Right. Where did they go to college?
They both went to Brattleboro High School. Then our older son Simon went to Carleton College in Minnesota. And our younger son Forrest went to Bard College in New York State.
Right, where do they live now, and what jobs do they have?
Forrest lives right next door to us here. And Simon lives in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Forrest is the town clerk in Marlboro and also is a photographer. And Simon is the head of school for the Darrow School, which is in New Lebanon, New York.
What are their spouses' names and occupations?
Jess Weitz is Forrest's wife, and she is a computer designer, or rather a web page designer, and a painter. And Amy is Simon's wife, and she works in the theater department right now as the head of the theater department at Williams College.
Alright, grandchildren, what are their names? Where do they live?
Forrest's two kids are Leander, is the elder, he's 15, and Althea, who is 12. And Simon's children are Ezra, who is 12, or just about 12, I think he's 12, and June, who is 7.
Alright, how would you describe yourself when you were a child?
I was active. I played a lot of sports and was really into athletic stuff, mostly baseball and football.
Alright, did you play with wood when you were a kid? Carving?
Not any carving, but we used to build, we'd go to work sites where we could get scrap lumber, and we would build tree forts in the woods. Because where I grew up was, we were surrounded by woods. And so we were always making tree forts and forts in the woods. But that's the woodworking that I did. I didn't do any wood carving.
Right, what high school did you go to?
I went to 3 different high schools. I went as a freshman and sophomore. At that time, my family was living in Longmeadow, Massachusetts, and so I went to Longmeadow High School as a freshman and sophomore. Then we moved to North Carolina, and I had my junior year in North Carolina. Then, when I became a senior, we moved to Rome, Italy. And so I graduated high school from Rome, Italy.
Alright, yeah, what college or university did you attend? What was your plan for study there?
Well, first I went to Marietta College in Ohio. But moving from Rome, Italy at age 18 to Marietta, Ohio was a difficult change for me. Marietta, has had its sort of good things about it, but for me, it was kind of, I didn't like it that much, so I left after a year. Then came, as I said, to Marlboro College in the fall of 1970. But I came in as a junior, so I only went for 2 years to Marlboro College. And my plan, my thesis, was on 20th century Italian poetry and translation.
May I ask how old you are now?
I am currently, today, 67 years old, though it's not my birthday. I'll be 67 tomorrow too, and I was yesterday.
Professional background now. When did you begin to realize that you want to be a professional artist?
I would say that probably began when I was living in Italy. But it wasn't as a woodworker or a sculptor or photographer. It was as a poet. I was writing a lot of poetry at that time.
Right.
So that would have been like 1967, 68, around there.
Do you think it's better to learn how to make art in school or on your own?
Well, I think they each has its own benefit. By going to a school, you sort of have the opportunity to try lots of different things and to be guided in various techniques, and that you have to kind of figure out on your own if you're not in an institution where those things are taught. On the other hand, sometimes what can happen to people who go to art schools, they become sort of clones of their teachers. And in some respects, like some of the things that I've done, some of the more successful things that I've done, I think, are in part because I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to, or you know, it was like I just made something and figured out how to make it, rather than having some technique that I knew and would only use that. It was more experimental, which, you know, can be beneficial, but can also can take a lot of time.
Yeah. Right, how did you learn woodworking? Are you self-taught?
Yes. Well, let me back up a second. Self-taught, yes, but I worked for a couple different woodworkers. When I left Marietta College in Ohio and moved to Vermont, the first place that I lived was in Bennington. And I was 18, 19 maybe, 19 I guess, and I needed work. Again, my parents were in England and I was here, so I needed to be able to pay rent and stuff like that. And moved to Bennington and got a job in a furniture factory there. And they made really crap furniture out of pine and just sort of, you know, it was lower end stuff. And then I worked for a cabinet maker who had a little woodworking shop, but who also in the wintertime worked in that factory, the furniture factory. But in the spring and summer had his own little shop, not, you know, a little bit smaller than ours right now, but about the same size. And I worked for him for a couple months, making rocking chairs. Then a bunch of years went by, and in 1973 I started working for a guy named Roy Sheldon, whose place was like right across the street from where we are now. And I should just mention, in part because it wasn't asked, but might should have been, we are presently at Applewood Studio, 2802 Vermont Route 9 in Marlboro. Okay, so directly across the street was a place called Fabulous Tables that was started by a guy named Roy Sheldon, and at that point he was probably in his, I don't know, 50s, maybe, yeah, probably his 50s. And he used this kind of furniture, I mean this kind of wood, but he made really different sort of stuff than I do. And Roy, I wouldn't say Roy knew a lot. Roy was a sculptor, so he knew a lot about form, he knew a lot about design. He didn't know a lot about woodworking. And so, and by the time I was working for him, he was in his late 60s. 70s rather, not 60s, but 70s. And so wasn't out in the shop very much. So in a sense, I learned how to do some aspects of woodworking by working there, but Roy didn't really have anything to say to me. So in a sense, it was like on-the-job training. I had a chance to learn how to do things and make mistakes and get paid. So that was pretty nice.
Hey David, I'll cut this part out, but can you help me with the tripod real quick? It's like not
Shut
working.
it off.
What?
You want to?
Yeah, I'll just.
I was going to ask you a new question.
All right.
Yeah. How did you come to choose wood as a medium of artistic expression?
Well, again, at that point I was writing a lot. But there isn't really, and I was also doing some translations of Italian, from Italian into English, but at that point, so that was like 1973, Michelle and I already had one child, and Simon, our older son, was born in 1972, and you know, I needed work. So for a couple of winters, like, because Roy used to close in the winter time, at least for the first couple of years that I worked there. I worked there for about 3 years. He would close in the winter time, and I would go and work over at Mount Snow as a lift attendant. In part because at that point we were living in Wardsboro. For a couple of winters we lived in Wardsboro because we were given a cabin for the winter. We were the caretakers of the Green Mountain Zen Center in Wardsboro, which doesn't exist anymore, but at the time that's where we spent winters. And then in the summers we lived in a teepee. And in fact, Simon was born in a teepee in Newfane.
All right.
But that wasn't your question. What was your question?
How did you come to choose wood as a
Well, so I didn't, in a sense, it wasn't so much that I chose it as I got work with Roy Sheldon. And I liked woodworking. I mean, even as a kid, building tree houses, that was something that I enjoyed. So, so that was all. It felt quite seamless.
Yeah.
What I also found was the more I did it, the more I liked it. Writing, sitting and writing, started to make me mental. It was not physical enough for me.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, again, because I played sports and did that sort of stuff, I was sort of accustomed to being active and sitting writing poems and trying to get them published and stuff is pretty sedentary work.
Would you give me a brief overview of your career and please include some highlights of your career?
Well, in 1975, so it was from 1973 to 1975, I worked for Roy Sheldon and Roz Sheldon at Fabulous Tables. In 1975, Roy died. At that point he was, I don't know, he was probably 78 or 9, something like that. He died. And then his widow, Roz Sheldon, and I ran the business for another year. But by 1976, she was feeling like her connection with the business had been through Roy, and she didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So Michelle and I were able to arrange. Well, it just so happened that this property came up for sale, so it was total luck, serendipity, and we were able to arrange through Will Davison, who bought the property for us, and then we were able to, he bought it for us with the idea that we were going to pay him back, which of course we did eventually. But so that was in 1976, we moved into here and started Applewood Studio. Then for the first couple of years, we mostly sold right out of here, what little we sold. But it became clear that that was not going to work because we weren't getting enough business. And that's in part why I started working as a bus driver also, because that was sort of steady income.
Yeah.
And so at that point we started to go to craft shows. And during the 80s and into the early 90s, we went to a lot of craft shows. Very often it was Michelle's work that we were showing because it's smaller and easier to move around. But I went to a lot of American Crafts Council shows and showed furniture, which, you know, was fine and but difficult. There wasn't, and then from there we started showing in galleries, both of us, different galleries, different, you know, because her work she was working in wood turning and wood carving, and I was making furniture, doing a lot of carving, but just a different style of work than hers. She got picked up by galleries more easily than I did because furniture is just more site specific. And so even though there were furniture galleries at that time, this style of furniture was not sort of what was popular.
Yeah.
So, right, so that was by 1988, I started having pain in my hands and arms, forearms, from using a chainsaw and auto body grinders, because the tools that we use are not the tools that I use are not the typical woodworker's tools. I'm more of a carver, so I'll start with a large form and carve it with a chainsaw or whatever else I need in order to make the table that I want to make. And so it's very physical work and very taxing, and because at that point I would work like 14 hours a day, I started to have like arthritic pain, and I was only in my late 30s. And it was at that point that I started teaching down at the elementary school in 1989. During that time, I felt like I kind of had two jobs, two full-time jobs, because I kept making furniture here in our shop, but at the same time was teaching down at the elementary school. So I would work on weekends, I would work sometimes after school, but I was no longer showing in galleries. I couldn't keep up. I couldn't maintain that level of output. I couldn't make that much stuff because I was teaching. And so I started at that point working primarily on commissions. So, and have continued with that. Most of my output is from commissions. People will, like I'm working on a dining table now that I can show you later that someone commissioned last summer, and I'm just about to finish it up for her.
Whose work or what styles do you feel have influenced your work the most?
Not really many furniture styles. I'm more interested in sculptural forms. I really like David Smith's sculpture, Brancusi. And there are some other woodworkers whose work I like, but as far as them actually influencing what I do, I'm not so sure. But J.B. Blunk is a furniture maker whose work I certainly was influenced by. John Brooks, Howard Werner, to some degree Mark Lindquist.
Yeah. Who or what experiences have kept you engaged in woodworking?
In a sense, making things is a joy. It's fun to do. Sometimes I feel like I make things because I want to see how they look when I get done with them. Like I'll see something in my head, either a table or a sculpture or a photograph or something like that, and then I want to see what it looks like. But the only way I can see what it looks like is if I make it. And so, in many respects, that's an inspirational aspect. I mean, there is the very real necessity of income. In order to continue to live here and to continue to eat and pay our bills, we need a certain amount of income. And so certainly the financial aspect of it all is a motivator as well. But not enough of a motivator. In other words, if I didn't love making stuff, I would have found some other job to do. But I really find making things to be satisfying. And I've been fortunate that people have continued to buy my work. I have a lot of repeat customers. By that I mean that somebody will, like this dining table that I'm making is for a woman for whom I made something about 3 years ago. And then last summer she came back and said, well, I'd like a dining table. And then we began figuring out how to do that. And I have a lot of repeat customers like that, which, you know, I think that says that people like what I do. And that too is gratifying.
All right, the business, Applewood. How did you come up with the name Applewood, and when did you first open your business?
We came up with the name Applewoods. My last name is Holzapfel, which is a German name. And Holz, H-O-L-Z, in German means wood. And Apfel, A-P-F-E-L, means apple. And so Holzapfel was too difficult for people to, you know, again, coming off the road here and people traveling along Route 9 at 50 miles an hour, to see a sign that says Holzapfel, it's like, what? All those P's, Z's, and F's so close together they couldn't pronounce it. And so we decided to use Applewoods to anglicize it and make it more easily pronounced by Americans.
Sometimes artists have other jobs to make money, not to make enough money, to work as an artist. What jobs other than woodworking have you done?
Well, let's see, for a while I worked on the Vermont, I was an artist in residence for the Vermont Council on the Arts, and went around to a bunch of different schools in the area and did woodworking with kids. We would make stilts and little race cars and, you know, whatever, in some respects, whatever the kids wanted to make. And I was also a school bus driver. I had a regular bus route. At that time, Gail MacArthur and I were the primary drivers for a number of years, but also other drivers as well. But she and I probably were the longest at that time.
Yeah.
Also, as a woodworker, aside from furniture, I would make picnic tables, sort of other ways to make money when people weren't buying furniture or, you know, that sort of thing. And then, as I said, I then started teaching at the elementary school in 1989.
your home is right next to your studio. What are some of the benefits to working in your home? Are there downsides?
Working and having our house right next to the studio is actually, for me, great. We don't have to commute anywhere to get to work, so we're not having to drive places to get to work. It also means that if I'm working on something like, for example, this dining table, later today I have to put some finish on the top. If I had to drive somewhere to do that work, that would be a pain. Whereas I can come out here for a half an hour and put finish on this table, and then turn around and walk back into the house. So that is a real benefit, has been a lasting benefit. Downsides, I would say the only downside is that you're always at work.
Yeah.
It's hard to remove oneself from always being working.
Yeah.
But I like work, so it's...
Alright, when your sons were young, how did you balance work at the studio with your own responsibilities?
When they were really young, that fell more to Michelle. But once they started going to school, then it was easier to get in a work day. But the sort of the child rearing and the domestic aspects of life were always a little difficult to negotiate. And I'm not proud of this, but I would say that more of that fell to Michelle than to me. So it was always a juggling act, and in some respects it still is, but less so because we don't have children. Right, our children are like wicked old.
Alright, what has it been like sharing your business in the studio with another person?
I think that has gone remarkably well. I can't even think of it. I mean, there certainly have been times when we've gotten on each other's nerves here in the shop, but mostly not. It was pretty clear fairly early on that we were going to have our own section, our own areas in the shop. So I had my section, Michelle had hers. I tend to be messier than Michelle. Michelle's quite neat and needs to have, as any person does, needs to have her stuff where she knows where it is, and likewise I need the same thing. I tend to spread out. My work is bigger than hers, and so that is a factor as well. But the real benefit has been that times when I'm making something and I get to a place where I'm not sure exactly what I need to do next, or likewise if she gets to a place when she's working on a piece, she will also consult me, and I'll consult her. So I'm carving this form. It's like, what do I need to do next? And she and I can talk about it. She understands the material, the wood that we use. She understands how to accomplish things in wood. And so we can have a conversation about the form and about technique. I mean, it doesn't happen all that much, but when it's crucial, when you're really stuck with something, it's great to have somebody who knows what you're dealing with. Whether she or I do what the other suggests, that's another matter. But even so, it's good to get someone else's perspective. You're busy right now.
Okay. Okay. How did you learn to run the business, sales, and promotional parts of your job?
That was, I don't know, probably mostly trial and error. It is a fact that as an artist you could make the greatest stuff in the world, but if you can't make any money from it and don't have any money, you're not going to last long. So in other words, as an artist, you either have to be have money, that is to say inherited money, or you need to have a job that supplements your artwork, or you need to know and learn how to promote yourself. And in a sense, we didn't inherit any money, but we did have outside work. I almost always did, because we just couldn't make enough. And then as well, you needed to learn how to promote yourself. So what that has meant is that, for example, when we went to craft shows, we had to take pictures of the work that we were making. And that meant that I had to learn how to use a camera.
Yeah.
And had to.
Yeah, I thought that.
Let's show it here.
Okay.
This is what's bothering Ben. This.
Oh, I hate that back.
Yeah. No.
To help him, I'm gonna place it over here.
Oh, you should probably put it like on a carpet so it doesn't buzz and yeah.
That way he won't be distracted. And to future viewers of this video, that is called, what do you call that? Is that an iPhone?
I call it an iPhone, yeah.
It's an iPhone. You in the future will have no idea what that is.
Yes, you will. Probably will. Because Apple is a big company, it's gonna die.
In 100 years?
Probably not. I mean,
Yeah, Apple probably still have some sort of thing still going.
like the thing of car companies, a lot of car companies are
Yeah, cars are gonna be
around for
a long time until they die.
Okay, so self-promotion. You have to learn how to do stuff. You have to, so in many respects, and again, here's where Michelle and I were kind of a team with that. I took all the photographs. I contacted galleries and did that kind of correspondence. She did a lot of the design work for our ads, ads that we take out in magazines. She does the design work and she keeps the books. So in a way we work together to keep the boat afloat.
Alright, how do you sell your work in galleries or museum shows or your studio? And what were your most recent exhibits? Exhibits.
I sell pretty much everything right out of here, our shop, and 90% of it is commission work. Last weekend someone came and bought a vase that I had made, but it's pretty rare for someone to buy something that I've already made. It happens. I mean, in some respects I feel like with the pieces that I make, I'm just waiting for the owner to show up. And I don't know if they will. But you make things because you want to, because you want to see what it looks like, and then you have to hope that it appeals to someone else. So at present, and really since I started teaching, I've really worked right out of the shop and on commission. The most recent show that I was involved in was in Brattleboro at Mitchell Giddings Gallery in Brattleboro. And before that was up at Marlboro College. Michelle and I had a show at Marlboro College. In 2010, Michelle and I were part of a show over at the Bennington Museum celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Vermont Crafts Council. And so we had work over there as well. Those are the most recent three shows that come to mind.
All right. Who is a typical buyer of your work? Who are your typical clients?
People who buy furniture that I make aren't buying it because they need a table. They can go to IKEA and buy a table. So they're wanting something that, well, I should say, because of the material, every piece that I make is the only one there is. I can't make the same piece twice because the material is different every time. So I think that's something that people are drawn to. The material, the wood, is not wood that's commercially available. We get most of our wood from loggers and farmers, and then we cut it up ourselves, mill it. We have a chainsaw mill and cut logs up into boards and then store them and then use them. So, but they're all from right around here, like that table there, and those, that one up on the wall, and the one that Sean is leaning against there. That's all from a tree that came to us from West Brattleboro. So they're all local woods. This table top came from Wilmington. What was the question again?
How do you sell your work in galleries? Oh, no, that's the last question. Who is your typical buyer of your work?
Right. So, in a sense, that's the typical buyer. Obviously, the typical buyer, again, because this is custom work, we're not a factory. Each piece is made one at a time, and so it's more expensive than going into a furniture factory store. And so our typical buyer has to be able to afford to buy our work. We don't own any of our work because, in fact, we really couldn't afford it. And so for me, it's just fortunate that something that I like doing, enough people appreciate the work that I do, that they're willing to buy it from me.
Has your teaching experience helped you in dealing with customers?
In some ways I think it has. In that one of the things that teachers have to do is learn how to explain things. And so I can explain these woods fairly okay, and explain what I'm doing and explain what's happening in the woods. So we talk about, so if someone comes in and they're curious, I can talk to them about spalted wood, how that comes about. I can talk to them about burls and burl grain and how all that occurs. And I have little models that I can show people. I guess that's really the only way I could see that there's some connection. In some respects, well, I don't know. I guess that answers that question.
Processes and products will. What woods that you like? What woods that you like to work? What are some woods that you like to work with? Sorry, this is a typo.
Well, I think I like different woods for different reasons. I like cherry because it really smells good when you're working on it. And I like working yellow birch because it reminds me of Tinker Toys, which, do Tinker Toys even exist anymore? You ever heard of Tinker Toys?
No.
Okay, Tinker Toys were like little dowels that you could assemble.
Oh, I know.
But they were wooden and they were made from birch. And of course, as a little kid, you're always chewing on stuff. So I would chew on them, and the taste of birch is something that when I don't chew on these tables, but when I'm working birch, there's the sawdust and the smell of it evokes Tinker Toys for me. I would say those are my two favorite in terms of working. I really like spalted wood. It's the black lines and the pattern in the wood is really mysterious. Yeah, those are spalted wood.
That's cool. Right.
Yeah.
Well, where does the wood come from?
Well, as I said, it comes from around here. When I started to work for Roy, he had a couple French-Canadian loggers who brought him stuff. I'm not exactly sure how that even came about, whether Roy approached them and said, can you bring me burls that I can cut up into boards and make tables out of? I don't really know how that happened, but Ovid Dupuis and Richard Boisvert were two loggers that brought burls and crazy pieces of wood to Roy. And when Michelle and I bought what was left from Roy's business and moved over here, those loggers continued to bring wood to us that we would then buy from them. Now, for the loggers and occasionally farmers, we are another source of income. They're out in the woods where these burls are, the burls, because you can't make 2x4s out of them. They're crazy shaped, and some of them are really big, and so we have the equipment to cut it up into boards and to dry it. But what that also means is that all our woods are from right around here.
Right. What tools do you usually use?
Again, non-standard woodworking tools, although also standard woodworking tools. Chainsaw, auto body grinder, a power planer, die grinders, rasps, chisels, sandpaper. You've heard of sandpaper?
Yeah, we use it a lot.
You do, yeah.
So, would you give us an example of your process from beginning to end?
Well, I'll use this dining table as an example. One of the I don't know if you call it an innovation or one type of material that I use are hollow logs. Logs occasionally will what's called center rot. Something will happen high up in the tree and rot will begin down through the center of the tree. But the tree will have a rim, sometimes it's quite thick, of living wood. The tree looks like it's healthy. Yeah, that's right. That's an example. And so what I do, and what I'm doing now with this dining table, or you see that piece that Roxanne was leaning, that was a partial hollow. So I'll take a hollow. Here's the hollow log. I'll cut it in half, and then carve the inside out so it's a uniform thickness.
Yeah.
And then in the case of this dining table, I have it turned like this. So it's two C shapes facing, and then the top will be sit on top of those.
Yeah.
So that involves a lot of carving because these hollows are not uniform, and I have to carve them to make them uniform. That initially involves a lot of chainsaw work. A lot of the roughing out that I do is with the chainsaw.
Alright, would you describe some of the types of projects you make? Objects you make?
Well, again, most of it is furniture, and I carve little bowls, burl bowls, like this cherry burl bowl, stuff like that. I made vases, but mostly furniture. And also more sculptural pieces like those masks up on the wall there.
How has your work changed during your career? What are some of your early interests compared to what you are working on now?
You know, in many respects, I don't know, as I'm thinking about it now, they haven't changed all that much. The things that were of interest to me when I got started are still of interest to me. I would say that as I've gotten better at what I do, that the forms that I create are more refined and more ambitious, but the initial interest in the material and in the process is still pretty much the same.
Some of your functional work is commissioned by people for their homes or offices, and some of your work is less functional, more sculptural. What are the differences between? What are the differences in the process for the different types of pieces?
There really isn't any process, or difference in the process. In many respects, one aspect of the furniture that I make is that it's sculptural. Okay, so a sculptor, if they're what's called a subtractive sculptor, will take a mass, a big form, and carve it and get rid of everything they don't want through carving. As opposed to a cabinet maker who will get boards and glue them together to make a table. I start with, like all of these tables are a single piece of wood. The dining table that I'm working on is a single piece of wood.
Yeah.
It's 38, 40 inches wide and about 8 feet long. It's a single board of spalted sugar maple. And so I'm not a cabinet maker. And so the way I think about the furniture that I make is that it is sculptural.
Mm.
And so the sculptures that I make, I don't know, I guess they tend to be more amusing. So much of making things, you know, whether it's music or pottery or whatever it is, drawings, you have to make things to amuse yourself because you're the only one who really cares. And if you don't even care, then there's no point to it. So it's mostly to amuse myself that I make different things, but there's not really any difference in the way I approach it. It's still something in my head that I want to manifest, that I want to make and see it in 3 dimensions.
So do you work with materials other than wood?
Sometimes, but mostly it's wood. Well, you know, I've made a bunch of glass-topped dining tables and tables, but those are, I'm not working with them so much. Those are features or elements of the table that I've made. Mostly I work in wood. Occasionally with other materials, but not not much.
Right. What are some of the parts of this job you especially like?
I would say the process, the making, manifesting something that's in your head and creating it from nothing.
Yeah. Oh, what parts that you don't like?
It's very dusty work.
Huh.
But I'm very careful about, I use safety equipment and dust masks and whatnot, but it's dusty work. But I don't actually mind that.
What time is it?
It is.
It is now 4:28.
Right, so I'm almost done. Yeah, okay, Krista. Alright, what is the worst accident you've ever had in the shop?
About 3 years ago, I was doing something that I'd done many times, but through an error, I got my hand stuck. I had a rubber glove on. I was making a tenon, and this piece of wood got stuck, and the rubber glove, the thumb stretched, and I couldn't get my hand off it, and it was turning around. If you imagine like an electric pencil sharpener,
Yeah.
but big and more powerful. This thing started spinning around and I couldn't get my hand out, and I broke my right hand. Remember when I was down at school?
I
Oh, I remember,
that.
yeah.
You explained it to us. We did, in junior high class, we also use like tenons and drills.
That's right, and you use the same tenon cutters that I use, but this was bigger.
Yeah.
And
That'd be very
rubber
cool.
gloves, don't ever use rubber gloves.
Leather. What are some of the ways?
That was after 40 years.
Oh.
It was, like I cut my finger the other day,
Yeah.
little cut, stuff like that. Happens just because it does, but that, breaking my hand was the first time in 40 years that I've had to go to the emergency room.
Have you had any other accidents?
I mean, not other than, I don't know, dropping something on my foot,
Yeah.
but not breaking anything.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's been, knock on wood,
Yeah.
it's been fairly
Okay, what is
I
it?
should have done.
Knock on wood. Oh, God, again. Alright, what is
Again?
Again.
Wow.
Yeah, I heard that one before. What are some of the ways that being a wood artist have changed over the course of your career?
I don't know that, I think the market has changed more than the being a woodworker has changed. The market, well, it changes a lot. I would say that it's the market that's changed more than anything. But having said that, it's never, if you want to, in your life, if you want to make a lot of money, don't be a woodworker. But if what you want in your life is satisfaction and to enjoy what you do, then it's a good thing to do. So you kind of have to sacrifice making a lot of money. And in a way, we just always wanted to just break even. Just have enough money to live. We've never missed a meal, except by choice. And all these years, we've paid all our bills and put our kids through college and kept a roof over our heads. So, to me, that's success.
Oh, okay. You are also a photographer. How did you learn the techniques of photography?
Initially, it was when we would apply to craft shows, we needed to send in slides. And so, with the help of a professional photographer friend, I learned how to make product images. So I take all the pictures of all the work that I make and the work that Michelle makes. And so through that I learned how to use a camera and how to light for camera work.
Yeah. Will you describe some of the types of images you've made recently?
Most recently, I was walking in the woods and noticed how cool leaf buds were just as they were about to open. So I've recently taken some pictures of leaf buds just as they're emerging. Also red maple flowers are also cool. Those are the most recent.
Right. What part does chance play in making your wood art and your photos?
Well, chance plays a bigger role in photography than it does in woodworking. In part, it has to. When you're woodworking, chance is a factor because you can't really know what's going to happen ultimately. But when you're taking a photograph, unless you're making a photograph in a studio where you're controlling the lights and you're controlling everything about it, then chance is not such a factor. In photography, as soon as you step out and you're in the big world, chance is a big factor because you never know what's going to happen, what's going to attract your eye, what's going to make a successful image. It's very different now with digital technology. When it was just film and you didn't really know what you had, you'd make an image, you'd click the shutter, and you wouldn't know if the image was what you wanted until you developed the film.
Yeah.
Whereas now with digital equipment you can look at it right away, and if you decide it's not what you wanted, if circumstances permit, you can make another image.
Please speak about the importance of travel to other countries and how it has affected your work.
Travel to other countries is vital for everyone. It opens your mind to other ways of living and other cultures. It's very stimulating.
What do you see as the future of your work in your studio in Marlboro?
I imagine that when I'm done, the studio will be done, and that's okay. It's not like we can franchise this, and I haven't been able to interest Gordon in getting all dusty and moldy like this, so yeah, I think when I'm no longer interested or able to do this work, that Applewoods will cease to exist as a woodworking studio. But photography is a different matter. Not that I ever sell much photography, but the thing about woodworking is it's very physical work.
Yeah.
You have to be strong, you have to be light.
Right, do we have time to take a tour of your material and wood making?
Probably not.
Yeah. Right.
But maybe that we can do that next time.
Yeah.
Do that first and quickly
Yes.
look around.
Right. All right. Is there anything else about your life or work that you would like to mention, but that I haven't asked you?
Well, nothing comes to mind, but probably when we're all done for today, I'll think of something, but it'll be too late because the cameras won't be rolling anymore.
Oh, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes.
Ben?
Ben.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean.